On the night of June 5th, 1944, the eve of the largest amphibious invasion in human history, D-Day, an airborne infantry squad was dropped behind enemy lines, landing in the small but heavily fortified French village of Ciel Blanc. Their mission was simple: destroy a radio jamming tower built atop an ancient church, constructed by Axis power forces so air support could guide the troops on D-Day. Statistically, the probability of air support survival was lower than that of the very ships in the ocean. Through fear, courage, and determination in a situation of no return, the sky lit up in a flurry of AA explosions and gunfire, soldiers snuffed out by bullets before ever getting boots to the ground, a shell directly hitting the paratrooper squadron's aircraft, causing it to crash to the earth. A majority of them died on arrival. The rest were forced into hiding or faced German soldiers to die via firing squad. Throughout the campaign, only a fraction of the squad survived the drop, with even fewer making it out of the village alive. The official military records classify the mission as a chaotic but ultimately successful demolition operation. But the debriefing of a young paratrooper, one Private First Class Ed Boyce, painted a horrific picture that Allied command immediately sealed under the highest levels of classification. It was something beyond human understanding, and more so, biological and physiological comprehension. His testimony didn't just detail Nazi war crimes, it detailed monsters, a subterranean laboratory where the laws of life and death were violently rewritten, black tar serums, reanimated corpses, and mutilated villagers turning into unkillable, rabid super soldiers. But what truly happened beneath that church? Was Private Boyce simply suffering from extreme battle fatigue, hallucinating horrors to cope with the trauma of war? Or did the Third Reich actually succeed in creating a 1,000-year army of the undead that the US government quickly buried to hide from the world? What happens when you blend the gritty, boots-on-the-ground reality of a World War II mission with the gruesome, claustrophobic terror of the mutagenic and undead abominations? As today, we are discussing Overlord, declassifying World War II German zombie experiments. Ciel Blanc was a quiet town quickly occupied early in the advent of World War II, turned into a strategic garrison. So for a minuscule population to suddenly end up disappearing, what would a few missing villagers in the middle of nowhere mean to the broad scope of the global conflict? More than the village was the objective of the paratroopers. Within the walls of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit was more than a radio jamming tower to scramble Allied communications. It was the Nazi Germans who were forcibly converting these villagers into. What would be discovered would be through the eyes of the US 101st Airborne Infantry, but more specifically that of Private Boyce. The gentleman was noted by his fellow soldiers as being too gentle for the infantry, where back in the barracks on US soil, he couldn't even get himself to shoot a mere mouse. Their landing in France was met with hanging bodies of fellow soldiers and witnessing their sergeant being slaughtered in front of their eyes. As they gathered the remnants of their group, the only thing that may have captured a record of what was about to transpire, a camera, would quickly be forcefully discarded. Losing another soldier to a landmine, they eventually stumble on the putrid and liquefied pile of what looks like canine remains, hinting at what may have been a jackal. Blackened biomass, bones jagged, ripped apart and brutalized by something that was completely foreign in mere concept. The disgusting sight would be sidelined when the group is spotted by a civilian. Having to pursue her to not be discovered by enemy forces, they hold her at gunpoint, instructing her to lead them to the village in the thick of the night, to find effigies of Jesus being burned in piles. The unholy sight was a premonition of the hell that was already underway, and for what awaited the remains of the 101st. As German soldiers patrolled the vicinity and interrogated the women, the 101st take refuge in her home, where the visage of a deathly search and destroy mission became so much more, bearing witness via window to the Nazi soldiers capturing one French villager and gunning down his wife. The village woman states that this was pretty common practice practice for their everyday lives. That people were either being killed or abducted to be experimented on in the name of science. A grim look into just how far they were willing to go on these people would be seen with the woman's mother, whom offered an unwilling glimpse into these nightmarish disfiguring alterations, flesh hardened, expanded, boiled, and covered in masses. There was no telling what they injected her with, what they implanted in her body, what abominations of the five senses she was subjected to, but the aftermath was far beyond jarring. Nazi human experimentation had been an extremely inhumane endeavor since 1942. Attempts at finding ways to aid German military personnel in combat situations, develop new weapons, aid in the recovery of military personnel who had been injured, and to advance racial ideology and eugenics, finding that civilians of other creeds and nationalities to be test subjects that would put them through experimentations involving things such as these: bone, muscle, and nerve transplants to try and speed up the process of recovery, regeneration, and healing within their own soldiers, putting subjects through extreme freezing temperatures for close to an hour to try and figure out how to treat and prevent hypothermia, creating blood coagulation tests that meant shooting or cutting into vital body parts of subjects and major arteries with the aid of blood clotting substances to combat blood loss, sterilization via drugs, surgery, and radiation in order to ensure those outside their race could not reproduce. High-altitude experiments subjected victims to extremely low pressures of simulations close to 68,000 feet in the air where people would die of suffocation. Hundreds of sets of twins were murdered and researched to study heritability and genetic research. The bottom line of all of this was that any and all people of non-Aryan descent were fair game to dissect, implant, mutate, mutilate, and more. But what was going on in Ciel Blanc was something else entirely from all of that. It was not something unearthed during the Nuremberg trials and doctor's trial that put the offending experimenting physicians on trial post-World War II. What Private Boyce just saw in this elderly woman was nothing short of a haunting mystery of the war's darkest secret. A German officer then had made his way into the woman's home for inspection, but in reality to fraternize with the unwilling village woman, telling her that finding volunteers for the army's science was becoming harder to find. When she refuses to have sex with him, he grows suspicious and has his men check the attic for her son to find him playing baseball, extorting her to say that they will experiment on him if she does not give up her body to him. Before he can commit the evil deed, he is stopped by Boyce and Russell, who knock him unconscious. Their mission progressed as they discreetly advanced on the comms tower. Boyce spots a cart of bodies being wheeled out from the mouth of hell, but these bodies were still very much alive. Test subjects so crippled by experimentation they could barely even talk, let alone walk. They were all biological rejects, swollen with tumors and hardened masses, scraps of diabolical testing to be exterminated from the record, flamethrowers used to burn them alive and reduce their mutated bodies to ash. The over half a dozen people were nothing but discardable sacks of biohazard material. Boyce could only bite his tongue with his iron sight raised, then lowered before being chased by German shepherds to stow away in a vehicle carrying the corpses of defeated allies. Infiltrating the labyrinthian concrete underground compound under the church, Boyce delves deeper in alone, hearing the screams of victims through holes as German scientists observe their behavior in holding cells. Boyce peeked into one of these openings to see a pupilless, turned over, and bloody eye staring back. A hollow but bellowing chirping coming from the faux human, knowing not what was looking right back at him, be it a monster, man, or something in between. Boyce's venture into the facility would show gigantic vats filled with a mysterious bubbling black liquid, almost like tar, the source being extracted and funneled through a large plastic bag containing what looks like a barely alive and breathing human being. These were an unholy hybrid of medical equipment with medieval torture devices. Curiosity and concern for an ailing individual, Boyce unzipped the bag to release them, as if a child released from the amniotic sac with charred fluid to release from death rather than to release from birth. The person inside rigged with the respirator to keep them breathing while brining in this unexplained tar. This unbirth is cut short when a German scientist comes in, forcing Boyce to hide once more. He would find over a dozen syringes of this bloody and brown chemical, choosing to grab one of them possibly as evidence of what he had stumbled upon. He wanted to know what this tar-like substance was. The depravity of the Nazi experimentation would come to full display once he hears the bellowing cry of a French woman, the silhouette not even detailing what the grand unveiling would be. A decapitated head and severed spinal cord, hooked up to multiple IVs and strung up via metal poles. The head was alive, fully animated, the spine moving like a tail, the lips in full motion, the eyes capable of looking right at Boyce. Although pale white, beheaded, blue lips, and no lungs, the head could speak clearly, uttering the words, "Arrêtez, s'il vous plaît," French for the simple phrase of "stop, please." This woman was alive and thinking coherently, but was left to be a lab rat with no limbs to flee, fight back, or even express herself, stuck permanently begging for it all to stop. A fate worse than death, and one that was awaiting a comrade of his by the name of Jacob Rosenfeld across the room, who he finds strapped to a gurney, gagged by a respirator and surgically attached to a tube. His attempts to free his Jewish friend were halted when the German scientist turned the lights on to inject a nearby upright corpse with the very same serum that Boyce was in possession of. Boyce and Rosenfeld now had front row seats to what had happened to the people of Ciel Blanc. What was soon to happen to Rosenfeld. Within less than 10 seconds, the corpse with the giant chunk of flesh missing from its neck jolted back to life violently. The dead body breathing and seizing, eyes wide open, alive. A devilish sight. The Germans proceeded to store the reanimated corpse in a nearby mortuary cabinet, keeping who knows how many of these zombified bodies in storage for further research or other nefarious purposes. Boyce knew time was running out and unhooked Rosenfeld from his fixtures, with the tube having multiple sewn points in his skin and a long 8-inch needle deeply embedded into his flesh that had to be taken out. He was on the cusp of receiving large amounts of that tar-like chemical. Sneaking their way through a nearby vent into the sewers, they successfully escaped the compound. Returning to his squadron, Boyce tells his unit that the Germans were conducting these indescribable experiments on people. While frazzled, he did relay information about the comms tower, but to a very disjointed mess because of what he saw. It was the deeper concern for the rest of his platoon, but once the pacifistic private pulled out that syringe, the tone shifted instantly. They would begin to interrogate the German officer that they had bound and gagged. They ask him what the chemical is. He would dodge the questions and would simply point to himself being a soldier that didn't know about what was going on, and that the people that died to these experimentations, well, that's just a thing. People die in the shadows of war in many unfortunate ways. It is the nature of the beast. That's war. But more evilly said, he mutters that all of their test subjects were given a purpose in life, that they retain value to the Third Reich's impending empire as mutilated corpses more than that they ever were as normal civilians with friends and family. The interrogation becomes violent as they try to gain more information, but nothing was beaten out of him, stringing him up and bagging his head until they formulate a plan to go back to the church to bring down the tower. They only had 1 hour left before air support would be coming in, wherein Morton Chase would let the German officer down to ask him further questions, just to be gunned down in a brief skirmish. Holding on loosely to what little life he had, he pleads to not die to his friends and to hold on to his camera. The bullets had hit 2 vital organs as he breathed his last breath. A man wanting to keep record of what was transpiring would be the catalyst for the full scope of what the German occupation was doing to the nearby French populace. Boyce, not wanting to see his friend and comrade die in front of him, haphazardly brings out the syringe. Taking a page from the Pulp Fiction scene shooting Mia Wallace with adrenaline, Royce jams the mystery fluid directly into his freshly dead compatriot. Not looking like anything had worked, after 20 seconds, Chase would rise to life as if jolted awake, just like the corpse that Rosenfeld and Boyce saw in the compound. To the astonishment of everyone there, He was alive and speaking, only just incredibly thirsty, albeit his speech patterns and movement were kind of slovenly, like in a daze, even poking at his fresh bullet wounds and saying that there wasn't any pain whatsoever. Maybe a stroke of good luck for the quirky young soldier, passing off his mortal injury as what one might say as merely a flesh wound. That is, until he crushed the steel canteen like a can of beer with no effort, to even his own surprise. Everyone else stands back as the symptoms of reanimation all start making themselves apparent. First, enhanced strength. Second, slurred speech and disjointed movement. Third, the individual feels extremely hot with a high temperature. Fourth, an excruciating headache that caused him to slam his skull into a support beam and break it nearly in half. Fifth, the veins starting from the hand will nearly protrude out of the skin and darken. Sixth, and more horrifically, his head would snap so far back from the pain that his collarbone would pop out while his head dangled in the back as if broken in two, snapping back forward. Last would be irrational and high aggression towards anyone nearby, with Chase grabbing Boyce by the neck and lifting him up with ease, just for wanting to help him, demanding answers as to what Boyce put in him. He proceeds to send his former comrades flying across the room, slamming them to the floor, making them all look like children to his now superhuman strength. Even when the zombified Chase was riddled with automatic gunfire, he would still come back up to try and continue his assault, only being fully dead when his head was caved in by the butt of a gun. By all accounts, this was a sentient, powerful zombie, long before the definition of what we know as a zombie today. German officer Waffner labeled this the 1,000-year soldier, an undying, immortal, and obedient organic machine fit to serve a millennia in the 1,000-year Reich. This was the fruit of the Reich's inhuman labor, a super soldier beyond the capabilities of any man, zombification for unending domination. The labs were for all of this. While bewildered at the mere concept of this statement, Waffner would take the woman's kid brother hostage as a gunfight of Americans v. Germans ensued, Waffner taking a bullet to the face as they take a vehicle back to the church with the child in tow. Corporal Ford says to ignore everything they just saw and stick to only the mission of destroying the comms tower. Boyce and the other soldiers belay the command, wanting to destroy the labs more than anything now. This was bigger than the ensuing Second World War. The advent of creations like this, resulting from what would be countless human experimentations to create unkillable soldiers, it would be a global fate worse than death for a majority of the Earth's populace. The mission's main objective was shifted. Waffner returns to the labs with a barely intact side of his face, more in pain than anything else, trying to turn his flight response into a fight response. Bullheadedly goes straight to the syringes, injecting himself not once, but twice with the volatile and still being tested tar, much to the behest of the nearby scientists saying this was unadvised. In moments, his screams of pain would be silenced, his stature going from an injured animal to that of Dr. Jekyll turning into Mr. Hyde, turning around to see that his facial wound meant nothing to him any longer. He was no longer a man, but a beast ready to kill and never be killed, with twice the biological ferocity of any other zombie before him boiling within him. The 101st would hijack a German motorist to rig him to explode in a fantastic fashion, binding his hands to the handlebars, putting a frag grenade duct tape to the inside of his mouth with explosives to disrupt and daze the front of the base, either killing a few in the blast or leaving them wide open to be gunned down. This was half a stealth mission and one in a blaze of glory. While the 101st was causing death, destruction, and distraction, Boyce, Ford, and the Frenchwoman named Chloe made their way through the sewers. Chloe deters from the plan almost immediately when she sees two soldiers and holds them at gunpoint so she can find out where her brother was being held, shooting one of them in the head without hesitation to show that there was no holding back, knowing that they were about to do to her brother like they did to her mother. Intercepting a transmission, Ford begins to rig explosives at the base of the comms tower, saying they have 18 minutes before detonation as the D-Day Normandy landings were about to occur, looking to kill two birds with one stone, with Boyce being set to rig the labs and rescue the young boy. Chloe would run in solo to the holding chambers of the zombies Boyce saw earlier through the hole. The German at gunpoint would be forced to open a cell. Chloe would see a mutilated and eaten body on the floor and darkness in the back of the room. Before the German can try and shoot her, Boyce would appear and knock him to the ground to save her. The soldier, stunned in front of the cell, would then be dragged into the chamber to be eaten alive. The undead here were starving. The Germans were most likely experimenting to see if super soldiers could survive off eating the flesh of their enemies without contracting cannibalistic-prone diseases, an easy way to make sure that they could keep fighting with sustenance. Regardless, the zombie would have a fast meal, and more so, a quick escape. The facility would soon be overrun in its final hour. Finding her little brother bound near lifeless corpses, she takes him, and the siblings flee back through the sewers. Being grabbed by the very mutant she inadvertently freed, he slings her across the room. A deadite covered in surgical scars, what looks like plating under his flesh, and a completely missing hand with sharpened bones in its place. Think the Butcher from Dead Island 1. A mindless creature hell-bent on murder, one whose flesh was twisted, altered, and replaced as the prototype testing to make super soldiers of augmented flesh and making this sloth-like Hulk. Taking multiple pistol rounds to the torso with no issue. He was able to pierce solid stone with his bones and even caused it to crack with such force, only being disabled via multiple bullets to the head, with enough time to get away. But the mutations inside him already had been curing his afflictions, steam coming off his body as he convulsed, high temperatures to ramp up the body's healing factor, zombification causing the super soldier to recover from these wounds quickly and then get right back up. The only thing that allowed her to finally put this longtime Nazi zombie down was procuring a flamethrower to burn it alive and ensure regeneration to be impossible, making it all the more clear that blowing this hellside up in flames was the only way to prevent its cursed plague. At the same time, Ford would finish rigging the tower to blow when mutant Waffner appears behind him, tossing him easily to stun him while he peers at the sabotage effort the Americans are trying to accomplish. All while Boyce would be attacked by the German scientist behind all the horrific machinations, leading to killing his first person. Boyce, who couldn't even kill a fly before, did this with no hesitation. It was a deserved death for a heartless husk of a person. Ford, on the other hand, would be dragged around like a plaything, Waffner dragging him across the floor and mocking him directly to his face, showing Ford directly how Waffner's wounds were already quickly healing in real time. The German would thank the corporal for pushing him to his limit to inject himself and reach genetic perfection. A monster in mind, reveling in being a monster. Waffner would hook him as if a killer within the entity's realm to be dead by daylight, to torture him as payback for earlier, to wave the very syringe behind all of this in the dumb American's face, to offer it to him as a cruel joke, but also to explain its origins. These massive amounts of viscous black substance were long dormant within the ancient catacombs beneath the town of Ciel Blanc, discovered during the siege of the village and quickly refined and prepped when the Nazis invaded. Not one villager of Ciel Blanc ever evacuated. They were systematically dragged out of their homes into the underground areas under the church and subjected to this substance. As Waffner puts it, their bodies perfected it, a vision for the Reich's dominance. His exposition would be quickly ended by Ford's saliva and, more importantly, Boyce's bullet. Although the preceding 9 bullets to Waffner's chest allowed him to show off his durability. The more he was shot with the intent to be put down like a man, the more his zombified mutant side took over. His face, growling and pure glare, was proof of that, as he directly pulled Boyce to him, throwing him in the morgue to show the bodies of his army's subjects, eagerly fantasizing about Hitler's invincible 1,000-year army. With this show of durability, strength, and more, it was a feasibly dark outlook if these plans were allowed to flourish. Ford would use deliverance to unhook himself with great struggle. Heavily injured and barely able to move, he commits a last resort, injecting himself with the vile serum. Fighting fire with fire, he begins a brutal brawl as he begins to mutate rapidly, healing from his wounds and becoming super strong in order to save Boyce and hold back the corrupted German general. The fight ending in the German madman's favor as Ford rolls a tank of oxygen underneath his feet. Boyce would shoot it to blow Waffner into the vat of black tar and stop him. Ford would lead Boyce out and lock himself inside, knowing that the serum would most likely soon pollute his mind like it did Chase before. Not wanting to become a mindless brute, he elects to stay behind to ensure Boyce may survive to tell the tale, and so that their mission, both the original objective of aiding the Normandy landing to make sure the communications can go out and destroying the German labs, would be achieved. Ford would see Waffner for what he truly was, a demonic beast, rising from the darkness of the pit of the world, as we could see barely any flesh left on his body, emerging from the black vats, seeing numerous Nazi zombies and super soldiers emerging from within the labs, as if there was about to be a mass outbreak in these last moments. Ford's symptoms were at their peak as the explosions went off, eradicating everything. His sacrifice ensured the Germans' mad science would be for naught, and to never emerge from the catacombs of Ciel Blanc. The tower came down. The comms were restored. The war, as it was intended, continued on as if nothing ever happened outside the usual horrors of war. And that is how the record would be carried on in the annals of history. The experiments were promptly shut down in a blaze of American glory, but the truth would be buried as to never allow it to happen again on God's green earth. There was absolutely no press coverage, nothing to trace it back to what had happened. Boyce, wanting to avoid this ever being discovered by any of the powers that be the world over, only disclosed in his mission declassification that it was still a simple comms tower destruction. Nothing more, nothing less. Rumors would stir of the labs down in the tombs, of these invincible German soldiers, of these reanimated dead, of the serums that could make you super strong but make you lose your mind. But Boyce, as the main face of the remnants of the operation, would deny these claims. Now, it's feasible that some may have delved deeper into the mystery of these claims, these rumors making their way to governmental entities that may have shown interest in the endeavor. Burned corpses of French civilians, men, women, and the elderly, found mutated beyond human recognition in the underground pits. That the ideas of mad Nazi experimentation were simply misinterpreted, and were not to be confused with the actual inhumane human experiments involved with the Nuremberg and Doctor trials. Viewing the remnants of what was in Ciel Blanc as a probable and standard, albeit brutal, medical triage center, much like Auschwitz. But still, some out there would probably stay stuck on the rumors of invincible Germans from destroying troop morale. Some researchers would assume that because the Nazis were known to experiment with methamphetamines and combat stimulants, and because the Third Reich was losing the war, it must mean they were just pumping soldiers full of drugs to keep them awake, aware, and durable, and the notions of indestructible soldiers could be stemmed from that, mirroring the real-world Battle of Auschwitz Fortress in 1915, almost 30 years prior, where 7,000 German soldiers had gassed a Russian encampment and assumed the Russians that emerged were invincible corpses when they marched back at them, causing them to flee. It is not outside the realm of how perception can shape the aftermath of wartime conflicts. Biological weapons were of course no stranger, especially in this time period in conflict. Boyce's silence knew that revealing this biological weapon to anyone could be a slippery slope scope to any government or military in either the Allied or Axis powers looking to use this for their own boost in strength, but at the cost of so many lives. Destroying the lab meant no one could prove the serum existed. The undead had been weaponized, but the living, thanks to their preconceived notions and strife for military superiority, kept the public away from the actual truth. Records could possibly have been left behind in the homes and outposts of Waffner or some of the German scientists. There could have been testimony for Chloe, who could have told inquiring minds of how her relative was subjected to the serum and turned into a screeching mutated husk, because there are still those people that were left behind. They could have been autopsied and more. Biopsies on the remains of all the bodies underneath and throughout Ciel Blanc may have hinted at more. Maybe schematics and plans may still be out there detailing everything. Maybe more inquiring minds could have gone through Ciel Blanc with a fine-toothed comb, especially with how much Waffner knew of this ancient substance and how far they had gotten with testing it, leaving some people to live back in Ciel Blanc after being experimented on. What happened in the labs was victims being attached to gurneys, others held in those bags to soak, others dying just inside their cells as the serum apparently rejected their biology, or where the bodies were dragged to be discarded. Just a few months of excavation would show that this gruesome operation was on the verge of mass production to be operating within the German army to give them an edge, despite conjecture that pointed at horrific experimentation in line with what the Germans had committed already in other places. The brass in Washington officially closed the book on the Overlord anomaly. What was rumored, said, detailed, and left behind would even be too much of a ghost story to follow up on. This was an all out of the blue, swift biological nightmare. The dead were waking up and being used for war and power. Boyce found only solace in the mission to destroy it all. The burden of carrying this secret meant fight or flight. Boyce wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was the executioner of a timeline that could have doomed the world. The logistics of the serum, the underground caverns of this French village, and how the Nazis formed their theories on this liquid shaped how the signs of this massive outbreak would or could have been construed. Before the event, French locals would refer to the church as cursed ground, both because of its dark history and the screams echoing from the dirt. Earlier, I spoke about how the black tar was mined. This was an ancient, naturally occurring anomaly that the Germans found, tapped into, and created a new purpose. But the church had only lived up to its reputation. But as Boyce states, there was no machinery producing the tar. The earth itself was bleeding it. It was being harvested. What was left of the dead wasn't just discarded, it was recycled. The notion of a standard military base was out of place. What was seen here could crop up again somewhere within the world. This was only discovered, not manufactured. What had been seen was testing with this chemical. While Boyce did lie to his commanding officer, stating that the lab was nothing more than a standard radio bunker, he buried the truth to save the world, leaving nothing behind but a massive pile of rubble and the blood of the terrifyingly immortal sprawled everywhere beneath the charred remains. Secrets sealed in gore. A secret war won in the dark. For those unaware, this video is a review of the 2018 movie Overlord, following in line with my previous review and analysis of the mockumentaries and found footage films Savage Land, The Bay, and Wreck. I wanted to discuss narrative and historical significance throughout the story, themes, discussions, and what-ifs. It's the best way for you to click on the video, the best way for the algorithm to favor me and trying to, get my bills paid because this last year has been hell, and just wanting to do it in a different way. What was most interesting was not only this movie working on an established horror narrative of Nazis creating zombies like Call of Duty and Dead Snow before it, but here it being more in line with reports and narratives detailing what they actually did with the horrific human experimentations looking to make their soldiers, weapons, and more powerful, and having an edge against non-Aryan adversaries, feeling more real than the action or comedy-oriented elements of COD and Dead Snow. Seeing hints at the people being changed to the super soldiers marching, sprinting through the halls to Waffner and Chase's horrific mutations shows how swift and secretive these trials, the trials with the unknown tar, were progressing, and what its potentiality could mean for the war and the world at large. We don't see zombies or the mutated villagers often, or at all, with a lot of them being implied, with most of the story surrounding the 101st Squadron dropping in and handling German-occupied territory, merging two big film genres pretty well to stand out on its own. An action wartime flick that slowly becomes corrupted by more and more of the zombie genre bleeding in, making it intense, making you think it could have been and what could have been covered up. The effects are sometimes cheesy and, the CGI could have been a little less used, a little more practicality would have been welcome, but hey, it's still pretty neat. And the story somewhat rushed near the end, I still found it to be a really fun and creepy watch, especially for something from J.J. Abrams, who is really hit or miss. Many people in my Savage Land, The Bay, and Rec review assumed I was either reporting a cover-up or spewing fake news lies. I just like talking about good movies that make you feel like the true horrors of the world may have had just a few more instances that we have never unearthed. The horrors of what happened in our world are nothing to scoff at. They were horrible. What was done to those people was awful, and made sure that through the Nuremberg and doctor trials that human rights codes would be changed forever to ensure it wouldn't happen again. But in horror, the more real and awful things can be derived from realistic scenarios, the more it gets under your skin. So don't be a Facebook boomer believing the thumbnail for this video and commenting without reading or watching, and enjoy the subject of the movie. No need to report me to my overlords at Google. That about wraps up this look into the movie Overlord. What do you think? Is there something I missed or should have explained more? Did I get too into detail about some of the sketchy territory of the history of what was coinciding with this movie? Let me know down below and what you want to see next. Make sure to support the channel by contributing to me on Patreon as a patron or becoming a YouTube channel member to be featured on this list scrolling by here, and see my videos up to a week earlier than anyone else. Also, I kind of need some help financially, so if you want to help your brother out, go to Gamersubs and use code WOW at checkout for 10% off your order. You can get anything, waifu cups, delicious flavors. They even have a new bleach flavor for the 1000-Year War collaboration. It's awesome. Again, code WOW at checkout. It helps me a lot. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, stay sane, and most importantly, stay WOW.